Good morning. Thankful to be with you all this morning. Thankful for an opportunity to share God's word with you and see you all again. I know many of you, and I know there's people here that I don't know, new people, visitors, but the church here has been a part of mine and Abby's lives for a long time. Since before we moved to Sierra Leone and then all the way throughout that, and you all have just been a blessing to us, and we're thankful for that. And so I'm thankful for the chance to be here. We're here because Gary went up to Soul Camp, and we're actually following him up today. But I'm thankful that it worked out this way, that we got to be here. Many of you guys know that my wife has been sick, and we've been back in the U.S. for a while. Normally we're just in the U.S. once a year for about 5 or 6 weeks, but we've been back for about 4 months because of Abby being sick. And we appreciate you all praying for her. We've had several people, even since we've been here this morning, sharing they've been praying for us, and we appreciate that. We're thankful to God that we found answers, what's been going on with her health, and she's improving with the treatment they've been giving her, so we're just so thankful to God for that. We see his answer to prayers. He's been helping us through this time of upheaval, and so just want to give you guys that update. The other question that I get asked a lot is, so when are you going back to Sierra Leone? And I'll answer that one too, since I'm going to get a lot of questions about it. And the answer is we don't really know yet, just once Abby gets better. So once she's all the way better, she's strong again, then if God wills, our plan will be back to return back to Sierra Leone. So that's, I think, the updates that I know to give you all. You're, of course, welcome to ask us more questions, and we'd love to talk more. So I don't have a report to share this morning about the work in Sierra Leone. We've been in the U.S. for a quarter or a third of a year now. I'm just going to share a lesson from one of the Gospels. And the story that I'm going to share with you this morning is one that exposes the shallowness of my own heart. It humbles me, and it calls me to a deeper devotion to Jesus and a deeper honoring of him. And my hope is that it'll do the same thing for you all as well. Have you ever interacted with someone who doesn't keep the status quo? There are things that we're all okay with. Maybe we shouldn't be, but we are. But they didn't seem to get the memo. The things that we all excuse in ourselves, they don't excuse in themselves. That happens in a lot of realms, but it happens spiritually too. And if you've ever spent time with that kind of person, it can be very uncomfortable. It can be helpful if we let it, but it's very uncomfortable. You know, we all love people, but they seem to take it seriously when Jesus says that we ought to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. None of us talk bad about people, none of us gossip, but they seem to take it seriously that no unwholesome word should come out of their mouths. None of us are proud, but they really esteem others higher than they esteem themselves. We all want to spread the gospel, but they seem to really think that Jesus meant it when he said that we should go into all the world proclaiming the good news to every creature. You know, none of us are greedy, but they seem to really believe it, that everything they have is the Lord's. Have you ever interacted with somebody like that or had one of those moments? I have a list of people in my life that I've interacted with that are like that, and it can just be uncomfortable because you realize you've just been messing around with it this whole time. They've outed you, not on purpose, but because of their sincerity. You've been splashing around in a puddle and you called it swimming, and they dive head first into the water, and it's only then you realize you weren't even in the pool. And that's not comfortable. None of us likes to realize that when we thought we were serious about something, we really weren't. But it's helpful if we'll let it, because we can't go on acting like our half-hearted service is all right. We cannot, when we've interacted with that person, continue to justify ourselves because we've seen the real thing. And that's why it's helpful. And that's the kind of person that I want to introduce you to this morning, or more likely, reacquaint you with, if you'll turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, we're going to look at the story of the woman who anointed Jesus with costly perfume. and she is one of those people for me. The eyes of her heart were open. She saw and believed and felt with such striking certainty the value and worth of Jesus, and she lived like it. We know that Jesus has all authority, he has all power, he is worthy, he is beautiful, he is glorious. We know that to be true. More than anything else in the world. But most people don't see it. Not really. Not in his time and not in ours. But you have this woman in Mark chapter 14 who saw it with complete clarity. She knew who Jesus was. She felt within herself the value of Jesus, and she lived like it. She did something to show that Jesus was worthy. I want you to see, before we really jump into this story, there's a contrast just in the setting of this passage. I want you to see this contrast here in the first two verses. It says in chapter 14, verses 1 and 2, "Now the Passover and unleavened bread were 2 days away, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him. For they were saying, 'Not during the festival, otherwise there might be a riot of the people.'" And so in the first two verses here, we get the context. It's just a couple days until Jesus is going to die. But at this point, the chief priests and the scribes, they want to put him to death, but they don't have a way forward. Jesus is a conundrum to them. He is a problem that they don't know how to get rid of. And you see the contrast here. On one side, we see this woman. We haven't seen her story yet, but she knew the worth of Jesus. And on the other side, you have these religious leaders whose hearts were hardened. They're plotting his death. Jesus has performed wondrous and loving things, and they have witnessed it, and yet they're seeking to kill him. Throughout the gospel, you see that in Mark chapter 3, Jesus heals a man whose hand has been withered, and you know what they do? They try to go plot against him. Later on, Jesus will show his wisdom, and they try to capture him in his words. Jesus casts out demons, and they accuse him. And just recently before this, in John's account, in John chapter 11, Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead. And you know what they do? They say, "We got to get rid of this guy." Like, seriously? He just raised somebody from the dead, and your response is to try to kill him? That doesn't make any sense, but their hearts were hardened. They'd seen him, but they didn't really know him. They missed it. Do you know how scary that is? How sobering that ought to be for us? These religious leaders knew more about the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures at least, than many of us in this room. And yet in spite of that, they missed who it all was pointing to. They didn't really understand who Jesus was. It tells us we can know a lot about the Bible and yet not value Jesus and miss it. But it's not just them. The people of our day, so many people of our day, don't see truly who Jesus is. They ignore him, or they play around with him, they toy around with Jesus. They give him half-hearted assent to his goodness, but they don't really see it. There's many people who have heard the stories about Jesus, but they don't feel moved one bit to serve him or love him or appreciate him. You know, if you go out in the world today and you ask people if they believe in Jesus, everybody believes in Jesus. Not really, but most people will tell you, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus," but they don't treasure him. They don't act like he's worthy. Most often people just treat him like he's a genie in a lamp. But even worse than them is many of us, or some of us at least, who claim to believe it, but so often our hearts are empty. Who is there who ought to appreciate and esteem Jesus more than those of us who have been saved by his grace and transformed by his Spirit? Nobody ought to esteem Jesus more than we do. But many of us talk about the glory of Jesus, but we don't behave like he's glorious. We sing about his beauty and his greatness and his worth, but our hearts don't love those things. Just ask yourself, how often do you sing about the greatness and worth of Jesus, but your heart doesn't feel anything about the words that are leaving your lips? Only you can answer that question. We praise Jesus, but we delight in other things. We praise Jesus, but our lives and our sacrifices at times praise money and work and sports and family over him. But then you have this woman, one of those helpfully uncomfortable people in Mark chapter 14, unnamed in this text, but she knew the worth of Jesus. And so this morning, that's who we're going to interact with. And the goal of this is to kindle that kind of love in our hearts. That we would love Jesus the way that she loved him. That we would esteem him the way that she esteemed him. That's what I want to accomplish this morning. And so if you claim Jesus, but your heart is far from him, I hope that looking at her life and looking at her example will lead you to confession. And that it will lead you to be transformed. And if you're somebody who is, and I know there are people here who love Jesus with all of their heart, and that's why you're here. And if that's you, I hope that looking at her example will reignite that same kind of fire in your heart, and that it will encourage you as we see this interaction. And so what we're going to do, we're going to see what she does, how the disciples responded, and then we're going to see how Jesus responded after that. And I'm hoping that it'll catch. Sicknesses catch. And I know that just reading it won't make it happen, but I've prayed that it would help us as we look at her example. At least we won't be the same after looking at it this morning, because there are some of us who are toying around with Jesus. We are half-hearted. And at least after looking at her example, we won't be able to justify it anymore. I hope this issues us a challenge and an encouragement. A challenge to leave off half-hearted assent to Jesus, and an encouragement. Because if we get this, if we follow her example, the entire Christian life will just open before us. But if we miss it, then we've missed everything. It doesn't matter what else we do. And so let's look into the text. Let's go into the story here. Let's read through Mark chapter 14, verses 3 to 11. It says this: While he was in Bethany, that is Jesus, at the home of Simon the leper, and reclining at the table, there came a woman with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, of pure nard. And she broke the vial and poured it over his head. But some were indignantly remarking to one another, "Why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor." And they were scolding her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you bother her? She's done a good deed to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you wish, you can do good to them, but you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for the burial. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went off to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. They were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money. And he began seeking how to betray him at an opportune time. And so let's work through this passage together. We see that the background, like we said, it's close to the time of Jesus' death, just about 2 days away. And he's in a small town outside of Jerusalem. It seems that Bethany was his home base throughout his last week. He would go into Jerusalem and come back out to Bethany at night, about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. He was at the house of a man who was a leper named Simon. They're eating a meal together. And the text tells us that as they're eating this meal, a woman entered and she was carrying something. It tells us it was an alabaster vial with a costly perfume inside of it. An alabaster is this white stone. And it was commonly used back then. They would carve it into bottles and bowls and cups and things like that. And it had this perfume that was very rare and precious. It tells us it was made of pure nard. And nard is this plant that grows in India and a specific region of the Himalayas at a specific altitude. And they would take its roots and make this oil or this perfume from it. And so it was rare, it was precious. And if what we read later on is accurate, according to the disciples, it was worth, this one bottle of perfume here, 300 denarii. And I know we don't deal in denarii here, we deal in dollars. But a denarius, a single denarius, was equivalent to a day's wages. And so probably the best thing for us, you think about 300 denarii, that's about a year's salary. Let that sink in for a moment. I mean, if we put it in our own money today, we're talking at least in the tens of thousands of dollars. The amount of money that one person would have in a year. And that's what's caught up in this bottle of perfume. This is not knockoff stuff. This is not imitation. This is no cheap perfume. It's truly precious. And the text tells us she took the bottle and she broke it. Maybe that was because that's how they used to open it. Maybe that's because she knew she wasn't going to need the bottle again, not after she was done with what she was about to do. And she poured it on Jesus' head, all of it. None of it left. And if John's account in John chapter 12 is the same, which there's some questions about, some of the details are the same, some of them are different. But if John's account is the same, then she pours it on Jesus' feet and uses her hair to wipe his feet. What do you think about when you read that? I know this is a sermon I talk and you all listen, but just think about it. What do you think when you read that? I like the way one author talked about it. He said it was lavish. And I think it's a really good word for it. This was unsparing, liberal, abundant, are other words you could use to describe it. I think it's helpful for us to ask, why did she do it? Why did she do this? And it's a pretty easy answer. She did this to show honor and love for Jesus. But the next question is, why so much of it? I mean, none of us, I use deodorant, I know people use perfume and they use other things. Why use all of it up? Just a little bit would carry the scent. And the answer to that is that we show how valuable something is by how much we are willing to give up for it. And so she did this to show that Jesus was immensely or is immensely and wonderfully valuable. She gave him the treatment that even a king, some kings, would not receive. This woman took the most valuable thing she likely owned and she poured it out for Jesus. None of it left because she wanted to show how much she loved him. She knew that her most precious possession poured out for Jesus was not only good but right because of who he is. It reminds me of what Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 to 8. He says that all of these things that he had are rubbish or refuse, sewage to him compared with the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus. This woman got that. That was her perspective. It was worth it to pour it out for Jesus. I want you to think about that when it corresponds to us. It is a beautiful thing when our love and esteem and honor for Jesus corresponds to his actual value, worth, and glory. That is a beautiful thing. But on the other side, it is a tragedy, and I mean it. It is an ultimate sadness when those of us who claim Jesus, our love and esteem and sacrifice for him do not accord or correspond to his actual value and worth and glory. If our all or value of something does not correspond to its real worth, we call that inordinate or disproportionate. If you have $20, but you treat that $20 like it's a penny, then you don't understand the real value of the money that you have. And the same thing holds true for Jesus. And so here we have this chasm or these two paths. And the question before us is, do we treasure Jesus in a way that corresponds to his glory? Do we treasure him for the treasure that he is? Because that's what we see in her. And we're going to come back to her example, but I want to move forward in the story. I want you to notice how the disciples responded. The text tells us that they were indignant and they began to rebuke her. Now, to say that they were indignant means that they were angry and surprised at the same time. They were caught off guard. I probably would have been too. I'm a little bit of an awkward person, and if somebody walked in and did that, I probably would have been caught off guard. And it says that they began to talk amongst themselves about how this was a waste, that the oil was so expensive it was worth a year's salary. We don't know exactly what they said, but I can imagine them talking amongst themselves, saying something like, "Hey, what's going on over there? I don't know, but it seems a bit excessive, doesn't it? Did she really just pour all of that out? Yeah, I think she did. What a waste. I mean, that's got to be, I don't know, like 300 denarii worth of perfume right there, and it's all gone now. I mean, if she wanted to do something useful, she could have sold the thing, given us the money, and imagine how many poor people we could have fed with that. It's all gone now. She could have thought through that one better." That's a good point. And so they talk amongst themselves, something probably like that, but then they turn on her, and they begin to scold her. "Hey, what were you thinking? You know, a little goes a long way. Next time, think before you act, all right? You know, all of that is now wasted, poured out on the ground. If you wanted to do something useful, you could have given us the money. You know how many poor people we could have fed with that money? Now it's gone." And we don't know, like I said, what they said specifically. But what we do know is they did this. They corrected her because they viewed her expression of love as excessive and wasteful. They thought it was over the top. And we're going to come back to that. But I want to see how Jesus responded, because that's what matters. Before reading, as you read through the account, to me, the question is, after you see the disciples rebuke her, the question is Jesus going to join in the rebuke? Because there is nothing worse to me than when the person that you're trying to honor and give a gift to does not appreciate it. I hate that. When you have planned and sacrificed and been thoughtful and somebody just brushes it aside, oh, that hurts my heart. We were watching a movie a month or two ago, and somebody did that. A wife planned something out really nice for her husband, and he just didn't care. I almost had to close my eyes because of how horrible it is. When you really care about somebody and you've thoughtfully done something for them and they don't care. And that's the question, but look at what Jesus does. He says, "Leave her alone." What a relief. Others may clamor, others may rebuke, but the one for whom it was intended appreciated the sacrifice. And that's all that mattered. And what we're going to see, what we see in this text is that Jesus defends, appreciates, and glorifies her. He defends her. He says, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her and acting like she's made some mistake or she's been foolish?" She hasn't. He appreciates her. She's done something good. She has anointed my body beforehand for my burial. Something Jesus has told his disciples, that he is going to die, that he's going to be buried and raised up. They haven't gotten it. And he's saying she has done something that you all don't even know the significance of yet. Let me tell you, you always have the poor people, but you won't always have me. And he glorifies her. He says, in fact, anywhere in the world where they spread the good news about me, they're going to mention what this woman has done. And so that's his response. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think we learned several things from Jesus' response. First thing, we learned that Jesus accepts this tribute because it is right and good. I think this shows us the deity of Jesus. If he were not God, then to accept this would have been proud. It would have been beyond proud, narcissistic, conceited, full of self. But he accepts this tribute and this honor. Why? Because it's fitting. Because it matches his real value and glory. I think if it were any of us and somebody tried to do that, we would feel immediately uncomfortable. I'm not worth somebody doing that to me. Sometimes in Sierra Leone, people will try to show honor to me in ways that I don't feel comfortable with. There was a time somebody was trying to apologize to me, and they got down on their knees and started to beg me with their hands on my feet, and I felt immediately uncomfortable. I told them, get up. I'm no chief. I'm no king. I'm just a person like you. I don't deserve this kind of treatment. But Jesus accepts this tribute because it corresponds to his actual worth and glory. But we also learn here that if we love others, but we don't glorify Jesus, then we've missed it. Jesus calls us to a higher love of others than anybody. Jesus loves people more than anybody. In fact, the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. But that's the second greatest commandment. Remember what the first one is? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if we love people or we do good things to people, but we don't really glorify Jesus, then we've missed it. We've got our priorities mixed up. And I think that's important for us because we live in a culture and a time that says as long as you do nice things to people, as long as you're kind and you love people, it doesn't matter what you believe. Love, that's number one. Love for people. Do good to others and you'll be okay. But that's wrong. Because if you've missed out on glorifying Jesus, then you've missed everything. I think it's also wonderful here that Jesus receives heartfelt devotion with joy and appreciation. You see that. She has done a good work for me. That wherever they share the gospel, they're going to talk about her. That's wonderful. Think about who Jesus is. He is the creator of the stars and the galaxies. He has received angelic worship. If we saw an angel right now, we might be tempted to bow before it because of how glorious those beings are. And they bow before Jesus. And yet the one who has received angelic worship appreciated and accepted this full-hearted outpouring of an unnamed woman. That's an encouragement to us. What can we give him that he has not given to us first? Nothing. Everything that we offer to Jesus has been placed in our hands by him, and yet, when we give things up for him, he joyfully accepts and appreciates that. That's an encouragement. What a king we have in Jesus. And I think it's really cool, too, that we're fulfilling Jesus' promise to her right now. We don't know her name, but we have her heartfelt delight and devotion on full display before us in this text. But the story doesn't end there. Verses 10 and 11, Judas went out. And this is pivotal in the story of Jesus. And I want you to see how this hinges on this account. Before, we have the chief priests and the scribes, the religious leaders, trying to find a way to kill Jesus, but they don't have any ways to do it. And then we have the story of this woman, and right on the other side of it, we have Judas selling Jesus to them. And so it all centers right here. We have one who has spent years with Jesus, who has acknowledged his greatness. He's taught other people about Jesus, but he doesn't really know him. And is going to go and team up with those who knew the scriptures, but whose hearts were closed off from who Jesus was, and they're going to strike a deal. Judas is going to sell Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And even here we have a contrast between Judas and this woman. Judas is about to sell the King of Kings for the price of a slave. And here you have this woman who, for one lavish moment of honor to Jesus, treated him in a way that was beyond a king. And so you have the contrast here at the end of the story. And I want us, as we close it out, to think about what do we learn from this? I have 4 things that we learned and then 2 things that we can do. 1, we learn that only those who know and love the great worth and value of Jesus will sacrifice their all for him gladly. If you don't get this, if you don't love Jesus like this, then you're not going to sacrifice gladly for him. It is only those who know his worth that will sacrifice their all for him gladly. Think about in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who found a treasure hidden in a field. And when he found it, he hid it again. And it says, for joy over it, he went and sold all that he had to buy that field. That's what this woman does here. That's her attitude. It says, for joy over what he had found, he sold all that he had. I think if you asked this woman if she had sacrificed for Jesus, I don't know what she would have said, but it certainly wasn't begrudging, because she understood that what she was getting, what she was able to do, was far better than what she had. And this ought to be true of all of us. But some here don't see the glory or value of Jesus. And if we don't see it, then we will waste our lives. If we do not understand the value of Jesus, we will trifle our lives away on things that cannot satisfy us and that will not last. It is not those who give everything for Jesus that are wasting their lives. I love the quote by a man named Jim Elliot. And he was a man who moved to South America to preach the gospel to people who had never heard about Jesus before, didn't have any access to the gospel. And the quote is made even more powerful to me by the fact that he died while trying to do that. But he said this: "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." That's truth. We are not foolish when we give everything up for Jesus, because we're getting something that we cannot lose. But we also learn here that there's no such thing as excessive love or sacrifice for Jesus, because he is supremely valuable. Think about the most valuable thing you could give up for Jesus. And if you gave it for him 1,000 times, it would still not match his glory. There is no such thing as too much love for Jesus. You can sacrifice the wrong thing. There's misguided sacrifice. I'm going to swim across the Atlantic Ocean for Jesus. He doesn't ask us to do that. So that's misguided, but it's not excessive, because Jesus is supremely valuable. I remember talking several years ago to a young man who had just been converted, and it was sad to me. We were talking to him about his parents weren't Christians, and we're asking how they felt about it, and he told us that they just told him, don't go too deep into it. Everything's good in moderation. You want to be a Christian, that's fine. Just keep your head about you. Don't go too much. No, not with Jesus. We need to get rid of these ideas of reservation and moderation, because Jesus is supremely valuable. We also need to remember this. Oops, wrong direction. Others will see us giving our all for Jesus as a waste. People in the world will see us sacrificing what is truly valuable for Jesus, and they'll think that we're wasting our lives. And unfortunately, even amongst God's people, some will not understand, and they will rebuke sacrifice done for Jesus, just like the disciples. I remember talking to a guy who, after counting the cost and weighing out the risk, decided to move to a third world country to spread the gospel to people who did not know Jesus, to glorify him. And Christians told him that he was making the wrong move. Not just that he needed to be wise about it or consider the risks, but it was wrong for him to take that kind of risk. Wrong to take a risk for Jesus? To live like Jesus is supremely valuable? How can that be wrong? But if we are people that live like this woman, we need to be prepared that others will see that and some won't understand. But the other thing we need to remember along with that is that Jesus will defend, appreciate, and glorify those who pour out their all for him. That's what he did for this woman, and we see it in other places. And so even if others don't appreciate, even if others don't know your name, others don't see your sacrifice for Jesus as worthwhile, you need to remember that he does. That he cares, he appreciates it. And that's all that matters. And we need to hold on to that. That's an encouragement to me. I remember what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15 at the end of that. He says, remember that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. It is not a waste when you work for the Lord. Or what we read about that Jesus says, those who enter into his kingdom, into heaven, well done, my good and faithful servant. What sweeter words than that? Words of appreciation. Or I think about what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews chapter 11, when he talks about Abraham who left his country, went to a place that he did not know in faith in God. And it talks about other people that are like that sacrifice for God because of their trust in him. And it's one of the most beautiful phrases in Scripture to me in chapter 11, verse 16, when it says that God is not ashamed to be called their God. People like that, people like this woman, God is not ashamed of. He loves and he appreciates, and he will defend and glorify them with him. And so let's be those kinds of people. And so ask yourself this morning, if you love Jesus this way, do you love Jesus like we've seen in this woman, or do your actions betray you? Only you know that. But then pray. Pray for forgiveness if this is not who you've been, and pray for this kind of heart. Because the most wonderful thing is that Jesus is willing to forgive us who have messed around, us who have taken things that are heavy and weighty and we have treated them lightly. He is still willing to forgive us, still willing to accept us back and allow us to serve him. And so if you've been somebody that has been half-hearted in your service to Jesus, take this encouragement. He'll take you back. He wants you. Even if you've trifled your life away, he still wants you. And so that's something that ought to encourage us. I appreciate you listening to the lesson this morning. I hope that that's something that helps us to think, and I hope that God can use that to kindle a love for Jesus that corresponds to his worth. We're going to have a song of encouragement at this time.